The courtroom was bustling with the usual tension, the air thick with anticipation. People shifted nervously in their seats, some glancing at the clock, others murmuring quietly to each other. The judge, an older man with graying hair and a sharp gaze, sat at the bench with his gavel in hand. His eyes swept over the room, dismissing most of the people as just another case to be processed. Then she entered. A woman in her late 30s walked into the courtroom. She was dressed in a simple but professional outfit, a dark suit with a blouse that had clearly been chosen to reflect seriousness without drawing too much attention. Her hair was neatly styled, her face composed. Yet there was something in her eyes that seemed to hold a depth few in the room could understand. She wasn't anything special, at least not to the untrained eye. Just another defendant. But as the judge looked up at her, he let out a soft chuckle, barely audible to anyone else. It was the kind of dismissive sound one makes when they believe they have already judged someone by their appearance. In this courtroom, people like her were usually no different from the rest, ordinary, forgettable, and easily dismissed. As the woman took her seat, the judge scanned her file. The case seemed like any other, a minor issue involving a misunderstanding with the law. The judge briefly looked over the details but already had a good sense of how things would play out. He had seen it all before. The woman's past wasn't extraordinary. She had no significant criminal history. She looked to him like a typical defendant, someone he could easily manage. She began to speak. Her voice was calm, clear, and steady, a stark contrast to the anxiety that usually gripped people in her position. The judge raised an eyebrow as she spoke with confidence, as though she had nothing to fear. His eyes narrowed. Could she be trying to play him? Maybe she thought she could charm her way out of this. He smirked at the thought. Then, as she continued, the judge's amusement grew. The words coming from her mouth seemed far too rehearsed, too confident for someone in her situation. Was she really trying to challenge him? He began to chuckle under his breath, low enough that only the people near the front could hear. A small, almost imperceptible laugh escaped him. "You think you can win this case?" the judge muttered to himself, not expecting anyone to hear. His chuckle was followed by a few snickers from the jury, who were clearly underestimating her as well. She wasn't the kind of person they would expect to stand out in a courtroom. She didn't have the look of someone who could shake things up. She was just another defendant, about to face the inevitable. But then something happened that stopped everything cold. The woman reached into her bag, her movements slow, deliberate. For a moment, it seemed like she was just pulling out paperwork. But then, without a word, she took out a small metal badge and held it up high enough for the judge to see. The room went completely still as everyone's eyes turned to her. It was a badge that none of them could mistake. The glint of gold, the unmistakable symbol, this was no ordinary badge. This was the United States Secret Service, USSS, badge. The judge froze. His body went rigid as the significance of the badge sank in. He stared at it, his previous smugness draining away in an instant. The entire courtroom held its breath. The room, once filled with the casual chatter of a mundane case, was now frozen in a tense silence. The woman looked up at the judge, her eyes unwavering. She didn't need to say a word. Her gaze alone told him everything he needed to know. This was not a defendant to be laughed at or dismissed. The smirk on the judge's face vanished. His mouth went dry, and he fumbled with the papers in front of him, suddenly unsure of what to say. His years of experience, his carefully honed sense of authority, felt as if they had crumbled in a single moment. For the first time in a long while, the judge didn't know what to do. The woman, however, remained calm and composed, almost as if she had anticipated this moment. She waited, the room still silent, the power of the situation sinking in. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on her. What was she doing here? Why had she revealed her true identity? What did it mean for the case? And more importantly, what would happen next? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered for now. The judge's mind raced. Who was she? He wasn't the only one wondering. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The judge, who had once been in control of the room, now found himself paralyzed by the sight of the badge. His eyes remained fixed on it, unable to look away. The gold emblem gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a symbol of power and authority that he could no longer ignore. His hands trembled slightly, and he involuntarily cleared his throat. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. The jury, the defense attorney, even the prosecutor, all of them were staring in stunned disbelief. No one had expected this. The woman who had been so casually dismissed just moments before was now someone entirely different. Someone important. Someone who could not be taken lightly. The judge's voice faltered as he tried to regain his composure. "Are you?" He stammered, unsure of what to say. His usual calm, authoritative tone was now replaced by uncertainty. The woman stood silently, her gaze unwavering. She didn't respond to his question immediately. Instead, she allowed the room to stew in the tension she had just created. The silence felt like an eternity, each second stretching longer than the last. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, as though the weight of the situation had not affected her. "I'm with the United States Secret Service," she said, her words deliberate and unflinching. The judge's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. The woman was not just anyone. She was a federal agent, one with authority that far outweighed his own. "How could I have missed this?" he thought to himself. "How could I have laughed at her?" The realization hit him like a hammer. He had just mocked someone who could dismantle his entire career in an instant. His mind raced, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of vulnerability he hadn't known before. This was not just any case. This was something much bigger, something far more dangerous. The woman's presence in the courtroom now made perfect sense. The entire case had been a carefully crafted operation. She wasn't here by accident, and her composure was not the result of mere confidence. She was in control of the situation. She had been playing a role, and she had just revealed it. But why? Why was she here? Why had she chosen this moment to expose her true identity? The judge's gaze shifted from the badge to the woman's face. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet determination. She had revealed her hand, but it wasn't an admission of guilt or an attempt to gain sympathy. It was a statement of power, and it was clear that she wasn't afraid of what might come next. The judge, still reeling, could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. The atmosphere had shifted in an instant. It wasn't just a courtroom anymore, it was a battlefield. The stakes were now far higher than they had been just moments ago. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. What had they just witnessed? How could they judge someone who was connected to such a powerful agency? Their minds were spinning with questions, and the uncertainty of the situation left them feeling helpless. The defense attorney remained silent, his mouth dry, unsure of what this new information meant for the case. As for the prosecutor, he too was caught off guard. He had come into the courtroom expecting a typical legal battle, but now he had to reconsider everything. This woman, this federal agent, was not here by chance. She had a purpose, and that purpose was far beyond what anyone in the room could comprehend at that moment. The judge finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "What is this about? Why are you here?" The woman didn't flinch. "I'm here for a reason," she said simply. "I've been investigating a case, and this courtroom has become part of it. But the way you've treated me, the way you've belittled me in front of everyone, it's not just disrespectful. It's dangerous." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The judge's mind raced as the realization settled in. He had made a grave mistake. His earlier laughter, his dismissal of her, had been more than just a lapse in judgment. It had threatened an ongoing investigation that could have far-reaching consequences. For a moment, the judge wondered if he had just ruined everything. Was the case compromised? Could the operation still proceed? He was far out of his depth now, and his earlier confidence seemed like a distant memory. The woman remained calm, almost serene, in contrast to the turmoil surrounding her. She had no intention of explaining everything in that moment. She didn't need to. The power was now in her hands. The courtroom would have to follow her lead from here on out. Her eyes flickered to the judge, and for a brief second he saw a flicker of something. Maybe pity, maybe disdain, but whatever it was, it sent a chill down his spine. She wasn't angry. She was simply above him now. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a place of reckoning, and the judge could only wonder, how far had he just fallen? What had he unknowingly set in motion by underestimating her? The answers to those questions would unfold soon enough, but for now, the only certainty was the fact that nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, each second dragging on, as if time itself had slowed to witness what was unfolding. The judge's hands were clenched around his gavel, his mind still racing to make sense of the revelation. The woman stood before him, her composure unshaken, as though she had expected this exact moment to happen. Her eyes remained steady, unwavering, as if she were simply watching the proceedings, not as a participant, but as someone far above it all. The silence stretched on, punctuated only by the soft rustling of papers, the occasional cough, and the shuffle of feet on the floor. The judge finally gathered himself enough to speak, but the weight of the words hung heavy in the air. He began, his voice low but steady. "You're saying you've been undercover this whole time?" The woman nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "Yes, Judge. I've been part of a federal investigation. The case you've been presiding over isn't just any ordinary case. It's part of a much larger operation, one that you've unknowingly become entangled in." The judge's mind whirled. He had underestimated her from the very start, assuming she was just another defendant, someone to be dismissed and processed like so many before her. But now, in the face of this truth, he understood just how wrong he had been. This wasn't about a simple courtroom matter. It was about something far greater, something that could affect the very fabric of the justice system. The courtroom remained still, every eye fixed on the judge and the woman. The weight of her words had not yet fully sunk in, but the magnitude of the situation was clear to everyone now. She wasn't just some ordinary citizen seeking justice. She was a key player in an operation that could shake the foundation of everything they knew. The judge's mind raced. He had always prided himself on his ability to maintain control, to keep order in the courtroom. But in that moment, it was clear to him that he had lost control long before he had laughed at her. His arrogance, his assumption of superiority, had led him to treat her with the kind of dismissive disregard that was dangerous. And now he was paying the price. As he processed the gravity of the situation, the woman spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Judge, I'm not here to destroy your career," she said, her words laced with an unspoken warning. "But your actions today, your blatant disrespect, have jeopardized an investigation that could have a far-reaching impact. Do you understand that?" The judge swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. His earlier laughter had been more than just a foolish mistake. It had been a critical error that could affect the lives of many people. People he hadn't even considered when he decided to mock her. People who were working tirelessly behind the scenes to uncover the truth. The room was still, the tension palpable. The woman's gaze never wavered, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the judge felt small. The tables had turned, and now it was his turn to feel the weight of power and authority. Not just the power of the law, but the power of someone who knew more than he did, someone who had the ability to reshape everything in that room. As the judge opened his mouth to speak, his voice faltering, he realized there was nothing left to say. He couldn't undo what had already happened. The damage had been done. But in that moment, he did something he had never done before. He apologized. I was wrong," he said quietly. "I had no right to treat you like that. I had no idea who you were. Please understand, I wasn't aware of the situation." The woman's expression softened slightly, though she did not offer forgiveness. "I know," she replied, "but you need to understand that what happened here today is a lesson. Not just for you, but for everyone in this room. You cannot judge people based on appearances or assumptions. Everyone has a story, a role to play, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who have the most power." With that, she turned and walked back toward the defense table, her steps confident and assured. The judge watched her, still processing everything that had just transpired. The words she had spoken lingered in the air long after she had finished speaking. The case continued, though the dynamics had shifted entirely. The judge, who had once commanded the room, now found himself in the background, a mere observer of the events that were unfolding. His authority had been challenged, not just by the woman's presence, but by his own actions. He had allowed his own biases and assumptions to cloud his judgment, and it had cost him. As the proceedings carried on, the judge could not help but reflect on the lesson he had learned. He had assumed that he knew everything, that he understood who people were simply by looking at them. But in that moment, he realized how wrong he had been. The courtroom had witnessed a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and the consequences of underestimating others. And as the judge sat back, he understood that this case, this woman, had changed him forever. The story of the day would not be about a courtroom victory or defeat. It would be remembered as a moment when judgment was met with a harsh reality, when appearances were shattered, and when respect for others became the true measure of power.